So I ended up having to sign a lease and move in with a complete stranger named Adam almost a year ago. Adam was a bit unusual, but we got along okay at the start. He was a bit too strict about chores and would constantly use my belongings without permission. We ended up having a massive argument and I just lashed out in anger and punched him in the face. I remember watching him in slow motion as he fell backwards and hit his head off the table. It was very clear that his neck had snapped, as it shouldn't bend at the angle that it did. I quickly ran into my room and hid. I didn't think that I would sleep, but somehow I drifted off. I awoke the next morning and was terrified to walk out of my room as I knew what awaited me. I eventually plucked up the courage and let out a scream as I saw him sitting at the kitchen table eating his breakfast. He looked at me confused and asked if I was okay. I just stood there with my mouth agape until he finally left the apartment. I convinced myself that what happened was all a dream, as it was the only explanation. That night when he came home, we ended up talking about some random stuff and actually enjoying each other's company for the first time. I found out we had a lot of common interests. We opened up a bottle of whiskey that I had gotten as a bonus from work and started drinking away. I got a bit too drunk and decided to try something out. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed the sharpest knife we had. I could see the shock on Adam's face as I plunged the knife into his chest repeatedly. I will admit that I got a bit carried away and stabbed him over 100 times. I walked to my bedroom and couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. I woke up the next day and yet again Adam was fine. I realized that I could live out my deepest, darkest fantasies and no one would ever know. Every night I watched the life leave his body as I used another method to kill him. It became like a ritual that I did just before I went to sleep. Imagine every depraved act you have ever wanted to commit against someone. Well, I inflicted them all on him. I honestly never thought of myself as a sadistic person, but I knew there would be no consequence for me. The most fun was when I ran a lawnmower across his body and watched as his screams were cut off as his face was ripped open. I came home one evening and decided to take the night off from killing him. As I was exhausted after a long day of work, I sat down on the couch and just tried to relax. I could see that Adam was giving me a few weird looks, but I just ignored him. I saw him shrug before walking away into the kitchen. I had forgotten about him until I felt him stab a fork into my eye. I began to scream in pain as Adam said, "I guess it is my turn now," before running a knife across my neck. I screamed myself awake the next morning and ran to the mirror to find no trace of the injuries that I had incurred the previous night. Adam smiled at me when I walked out of my room and said he hoped I had a good night's sleep. I ended up moving out of that apartment the following weekend as I couldn't sleep while he was nearby. I thought of everything I had done to him and lived in fear that he would do something similar. This is why I have lived on my own since, as you never know what your roommates are capable of.